What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another After Action Report with me, your host, of course, Joshua Joshi Howard. Today, we're going to be talking about the Ordo Fanaticus OFCC Teams 2025, which was held in Portland, Oregon. Now, if you're only recently catching up and you haven't watched some of these After Action Reports in a little while, it is worth noting that historically, I've been playing with the Get Hammer squad, a squad based mostly out of Orange County, California, and now I'm currently living up in Seattle, where I was invited to play with Deepstrike Gang, a team that is based mostly out of South King County, and it is a team that ended up going on to win this entire event. However, I was playing on the second team for them. They had their top five. They have a system where they have all of their players, and they asked me to come in and fill in their second roster. And of course, without like a permanent home up here in the Pacific Northwest, I was happy to do. A couple of really important notes about this event before we go super far into it. It's worth noting that I don't know how everybody else on the teams were really considering this, but I know a lot of people on Deepstrike Gang, both the main team and my roster, were mostly looking at this as a practice in a lot of ways for Challengers Cup. Like, obviously, we're going to try and do our best, but a lot of what we were trying to do is making sure that we are well prepared for the big Challengers Cup, which is, I believe, almost 70 teams being held in Utah. And so for a lot of players coming here, it was a little bit of an opportunity to experiment a little bit, try and make a couple of things happen that you wouldn't necessarily do otherwise. But in general, it was also a really fun event, and I know it was a really strong teams event from what I'm used to seeing relative to a lot of stuff I was looking at in SoCal, where there were just like not weak teams coming to this event, which is not something I can always say for every event I've always gone to. Before we go too far, I do want to give a big shout out to the teams that I know were involved. Of course, Ordo Fanaticus, which is an organization in Portland. They hosted this at, I believe it was called the Factor Building, which is in, I don't know what district of Portland, but over in Portland. I know the All Six Society, the top team that you see here on this, was also very heavily involved in making sure everything was going to plan. And I believe Underwhelming Force, another squad that was bringing 3 different rosters to this. A lot of their players were very heavily involved in making sure that this event was a success as well. So thank you to those 3 teams, Ordo Fanaticus, All Six Society, and Underwhelming Force, and anybody else who was contributing to making sure this was a success. I had a great time, and let's go ahead and start talking about it a little bit more. So at this event, I played under the roster Deepstrike Gang South, which was Andrew on Death Guard. It was a fairly normal, virulent Victorium list. Griffin Frost on Chaos Knights, and he was the team captain, and he was playing, I believe it was 3 Despoilers, and then a Great and Clean one, a couple of Demons, and some War Dogs. I was, of course, playing Guard with 3 Dorns, and we'll talk about that in a little bit in a bit more detail. Samuel Baker on Blood Angels. He was playing a pretty normal-looking Liberator Assault Group list, and Torin Holmes was playing Tyranids, and I believe it was I think it was Crusher Stampede? Am I just making that up? No, it was Invasion Fleet, but it had a lot of big bugs, like Maliceptors and Norns and stuff like that. Overall, we were going into this event with the expectation that we were there to, 1, have a good time, 2, our record goals, we were trying to go 2-2, and yeah, that was mostly it. We were just there to have a good time and make sure that everything would end up going well, and we could help out where we needed to and do what we could in order to help a couple of the guys practice, because I know a couple of these guys are going to be going to the Deepstrike Gang Utah event, and then of course I'm going with Get Hammer for that event. So let's go ahead and take a look at the list that I brought to this one. It is pretty normal looking stuff. There's been a pretty strong convergence in the guard list building that we've seen in a lot of different ways. And one of the big things about this list that we will talk about the difference between the event that we're playing at right now and the Challengers Cup did change a couple of things that I was actually bringing. And it definitely, if I was building this list for the Ordo Fanaticus event, it would be a different list. I would not have played this normally going to this event. However, it was a Cadian command squad, Rogal Dorn, 2 Rogal Dorn commanders with extra stubbers and multi-meltas, Ursula Creed, 1 unit of Cadian shock troops, 1 unit of 20 Death Corps of Krieg with Melta Plasma, 2 Chimeras, both with heavy flamers, a Taurox, 1, 2, 3 units of Kasrkin, all with Melta Plasma, and then you check all the other boxes. 1 Leman's Exterminator with multi-meltas. 1 normal Rogal Dorn battle tank with multi-meltas and stubbers, and then 2 individual scout sentinels, both with las cannons. And the big theory for this is that this guard list doesn't really have bad matchups. Like, there's almost nothing that I really care about in terms of, like, this matchup is really bad for me. I think the one thing that is a little bit scary is if it's like a full, like, super infiltrate jail so I can just never touch primary. That might be a little bit scary, but otherwise I'm going to be winning most shootouts. I'm going to be winning any kind of game that is on my board pick. Basically, I will basically never get worse than a draw on my board pick, is basically what this is trying to do. And that is basically what I told my captain, is just like, hey, if you give me my board pick, I'm going to do just fine. I'm probably going to get a 10 to 12 into most things, and if things go a little bit poorly, like an 8 is about the worst you can expect me to get in basically every matchup. The one other thing I kind of want to show you guys before we start talking about the actual games that I played was this little document that I made for my team captain. And normally, so there's two things you often do for teams events if you haven't gone before. The first one, and the more important one in general, is your matrix. And you just say, hey, looking at this other team, they're playing Blood Angels and Chaos Knights and Death Guard and whatever, and you're just like, I think I'm going to be slightly favored against Blood Angels, I'm going to be slightly favored against Death Guard, but, you know, Chaos Knights, like, it could be a 20, it could be a 0, it just depends on how the dice go, and you give your captain an idea of what your good matchups are, what your bad matchups are, and they can use that in order to try and make sure that your team ends up having more good matchups than bad matchups. But one of the things about this event that was interesting was that it was a mixture of W2C boards and Games Workshop boards, and you can see the different style in the way that these are done. The one other really important thing is that it was a mixture of WTC and Games Workshop boards, but we were never using the WTC charge rules. Now, I didn't really care about that because I never played on a WTC board, but I can imagine it makes things a little bit weird on the WTC boards in general. But this document right here is something I especially made because originally I just said, hey, just don't put me on super closed boards and I'll be able to do pretty good on just about anything. So this is one of those things where round 1, most of the boards are fine. I can play most of those boards. Round 2, like, I'm still mostly okay, but I've got a couple boards I don't really like, and by the time we get into rounds 3 and 4, it starts to be like, oh, I cannot play on these boards. Like, I'm just going to get blasted. It doesn't really matter what the matchup is. I just can't move my Dorns at all. And you can see, in particular, there is one Search and Destroy WTC 8. This one is like not, I can't play this one. So one of the big things about this one, and I'll try and do it, yeah, you can see my mouse, is the area between the deployment zone on Search and Destroy, so it's like right here, and this wall, there is not enough room to deploy a Dorn here. Like, it doesn't fit. So if I were to play this one, I would have to put a Dorn like here, like right on the line, and hope I go first. Otherwise, it's getting tagged turn 1, and then I can't move it. So that's bad. That's one of the big things about it. So I basically told my captain, hey, day 2, just first defend me, give me my board choice. I'm going to come back with a decent score no matter what. And I'll talk about the ramifications of that as we start getting into our games. So I'm not going to lie to you guys, I was not paying the most attention to how pairings went for my team because, one, I had both a captain and a coach, and they were the ones mostly like really diving into how we wanted to approach pairings in general. I told them, this is what I need in order to have some success. If I don't get X, Y, and Z, this is probably what happens in exchange for like not trying to set me up a little bit. So I don't know exactly how all of pairings go. I will have a lot more insight into how pairings go at Challengers Cup because I'm going to be one of the people who are leading the pairings discussion for that team. But for this one, I was like, hey, here's what I need, and let's go. One of the things I will say before I go too far that I did not realize during the weekend, and I found out like afterwards, is that my captain was intentionally trying to pair me into what we perceived or what he perceived as the strongest player on the other teams, mostly because I just said, you know, if you give me my board choice, I'm going to be okay into just about everything. So just kind of keep that in mind. My team was intentionally using me to tank aggro a little bit. They wanted to make sure that all of our opponents' good players were not getting the big scores that they potentially needed. So my first opponent that I ended up playing up against was Dan and his Chaos Cult. And Chaos Cult is a bit of an interesting one. It tends to rely on the fact that it is very fast. You can dark packs for extra movement. And when you add on top of that the Accursed Cultists with Dark Communes, they go incredibly fast. It's effectively, I think it's like +4 to their advance and charge. I think it's +2 move and +2 to charge if you dark pack for both of them. But anyway, his list, he had Cypher, 1, 2, 3 Dark Communes, all with different enhancements. I'm going to be honest, I couldn't tell you what the different enhancements were. A Lord Discordant on Hellstalker, a Sorcerer and Terminator Armor, 1, 2 units of Cultist Mob, 1, 2, 3 units of Traitor Guardsmen, 1 Rhino, 1, 2, 3 Accursed Cultists, a Predator Annihilator, and then 2 Predator Destructors. One of the things that I didn't really realize going into the first round was that our first round was going to be on supply drop, which is a weird mission to put it simply. It is one of those where you have to play very differently than you would in a couple of other games because naturally like one of these is going to disappear on turn at the end of turn 3, the other one's going to disappear at the end of turn 4, and then the one in the middle is always going to be around at the end of the game, which means that if you're going second, you just need to hold the last objective at the end of the game for 15 points. So it is a massive swing at the end of the game just because that's just how it goes, right? You just have an opportunity to get usually like a third of your points if it's a relatively tight game, kind of all at the end. So it's opportunities for big swings in terms of primary. It's also a very low primary scoring game unless you're just blowing your opponent out. So it tends to be relatively low scoring, and whoever goes second does have a bit of an advantage. But of course, as you can see, we did do this one on my table pick, which was Games Workshop 1. Now, there's a couple big things to kind of know about how this matchup works. The firstly is that if you have a Rogal Dorn commander and a Scout Sentinel points at a target of ACDC, the Rogal Dorn commander on average is going to kill like all of the little dudes. You're going to kill basically all of I don't know what the little ones are called, but the little ones, and then most of the command squad and the DC part of it, the Dark Commune. So it's going to be, I think it's called a Demagogue, the character, and most of the big guys left is basically what usually happens with this unit. But that means that all the big guys in the Accursed Cultist unit are still going to be active for at least a turn most of the time. The other big thing is with the 3 Predators, like the 2 Destructors and the 1 Annihilator, so the 2 of them had 2 las cannons and then an autocannon, and then the one with a twin-linked las cannon and then 2 more las cannons. It's really hard to kill a Dorn with this style of build. He really needs to pump his damage all at once with an Accursed Cultist unit. I think you can give it it's like reroll hits and wounds with lethal hits and +1 to hit and wound if you pop all of your stuff all at the same time. And that starts to get a little bit dicey as to whether or not the Dorn is actually going to die just because it's a huge volume of attacks coming in all at once. But if you don't pop all of the buffs all at the same time, it's going to take several turns for an ACDC unit to kill a Dorn. And with all that in mind, most of this game came down to one moment. So I want to set up what had happened around this time. I had a Chimera that had come up here, a Taurox that was alive here after I had dropped out a unit of Kasrkin originally. I had a unit of Kasrkin here. Okay, a unit. I just realized that this is also K because for Death Korps of Krieg. Rogal Dorn Battle Tank, Rogal Dorn Commander. I had another Rogal Dorn somewhere over here. And the big thing that we were looking at all of a sudden is that my opponent, Dan, had a moment in this game. He had Rapid Ingress, a unit of ACDC here. So there's a unit here, a unit here, and the last unit was here. Oh, I had one more unit of Kasrkin, something like this, I want to say. And the big moment comes in all of a sudden where I'm setting up to potentially get a reasonable score going into the turn 3. And Dan had a moment. Where he could choose to go for a couple of medium to long charges depending on what his advance rolls looked like. And if all of his charges go off, and he gets this ACDC unit to crash into this and then pile into the Dorn. And this was going to come in and crash into here, pile into this Dorn. And this was going to crash into the Kasrkin and pile into this Dorn. And one of the big things, of course, because these ACDC units are so big, is you can charge, create a line, and then you can swing this line out here so that you could potentially pile in and consolidate into the Dorn. But Dan saw an opportunity to go for this, and I remember talking to him because we had 4-hour rounds and talking about hey, is this a good play or not? It's one of those spots where it's probably the best line he would have had in a singles game to actually have an advantage. However, in this team's environment, it depends a lot on what his team wants him to do. If he wants to go for a big play all at once, if he wants to try and push and get more than a 10, this is probably the way to do it. But if his team just wants him to play for, you know, an 8 to 10 or even like a 8 to 12, he doesn't really need to do anything because he's going second and he's going to score the 15 points at the end of the game just by standing on here. And with all of the OC that he has available to him, he's going to be able to do it. However, Dan chooses to go for this moment. And one of the big things to remember is that all of his distances are basically like -4 because he is going to Dark Pact for the +2 move and then Dark Pact for the +2 charge. And ultimately, everything is really close. And I remember thinking to myself, like, if Dan rolls like reasonable, like a 3 on his advances, a lot of these charges are going to be like 7s or 8s. And having played with a couple of my other melee friends in particular, they always tell me that a 7 or 8-inch charge just like makes them sit there and clench because it is very, very easy to fail those charges. And if you fail those charges, well, now you're sitting out in the open and you're going to get blasted. But we started going into Dan's movement phase, and he starts rolling his advances. And this one rolls a 6. And I'm like, awesome. So that charge that was, you know, if you had rolled a 3 was going to be like a 9 is now, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think it was like a 6-inch charge. This one also rolled a 6 on the advance. And I was like, okay, awesome. That was probably going to be like a 7 or like a 5 to 7-inch charge. But because you roll a 6, now I think it's like, I think it was like a 3-inch charge all of a sudden. And this one I was okay with hitting because if the ACDC unit just like impacts the unit of Death Korps of Krieg, well, then I'm just going to blow it up. And this one, when it goes for advance, rolls a 5. So now this that was supposed to have been like, I think it was like a 6. I was expecting this one to have been like a 6. Now this one was like a 4. So there's a couple of things here. One, I was a little bit closer. I didn't really internalize very well how quick the Chaos Cults really were. But then when Dan rolls like 2 6s and a 5 on his advances, and I go, okay. Because I had gone over to talk to my captain like right about this time, and I said, hey, my opponent's about to take a bunch of risk. He popped all of his advance and charges in his command phase. Now he's going to roll some advances, and if he gets good advances and good charges, we're going to be looking in like a not great spot. I'll probably be looking at like an 8 to 10, depending on how much damage I can actually do back. But one of the big things that happens in this moment is because Dan hits this really big one. I already had a unit of Kasrkin that I had hopped out over here that ended up not scoring me my mark for death like I was hoping them to because they left one cultist alive. I had a second unit of I had a 4th unit of Kasrkin in reserve that ended up rapid ingressing here to make sure that when these ACDC make this charge, they would not be able to consolidate into my Dorn afterwards. Because if he consolidates into all of my Dorns, I am dead. So then Dan starts going for all of his charges. The first one that he actually goes for is he takes this unit of ACDC and charges this unit of Krieg. And he makes it, right? I think he's like a 6 rerolling or whatever. And I take this unit of Death Korps of Krieg and Heroic intervene in order to, there's 2 things I was trying to do here. One, the unit of ACDC that was here, I wanted to make this charge, which was like a 3, I think, and I wanted to make it longer. I wanted to make it potentially failable. A 3 rerolling is really easy to make, but if I can turn that into a 6 or a 7 or an 8, depending on how my Heroic Intervention goes, suddenly, if I can strand this unit in the open, I'm in a way better position. The other thing that I was trying to do with this Heroic is if the ACDC come through, depending on how my Heroic goes, he comes over here and he swings out and touches this Rogal Dorn. Well, that's really bad. So the Krieg end up going this way, and I roll really high on my charge. I think I roll like an 11, which unfortunately, because the ACDC unit here ends up something like this, my Krieg unit now has to end up over here, right? Looking a bit more phallic than I had intended. But the point is, I now have a unit that is about here, which doesn't really change this like range at all. It's about the same. I think I took it from like a 3 to, I think it became like a 5 or something. It really did not change the math a whole lot at all because I had rolled so high and I could not move the way I had wanted to. But anyway, we ended up with like 1 unit of ACDC, something like this. My unit of Death Korps of Krieg, I'm going to do it in green now. Sorry if anybody's colorblind. my unit of Death Corps of Krieg like this, and then the other AC/DC unit was like this, and it had like a tendril. It had like a tendril going this way, such that it did end up like touching the Dorn over here. But it was really funny, and it's actually where the thumbnail comes from, is when there's just so many things. On the other side of the board, the AC/DC unit here did impact here, and eventually just like comes in and touches. And this is where the game gets a little bit weird, right? There were a couple of things that I was trying to make sure happened in the upcoming turns, because once I had all of my Dorns, or two of my Dorns engaged anyway, I was trying, there's a couple of things. One, the AC/DC in this detachment are not really going to kill. However, there are a couple of things that I do want to try and do to make sure that the AC/DC can never kill. And the first one is I still have like my Leman Russ Exterminator here and like a Scout Sentinel here. And the biggest thing that I was trying to do with these is I wanted to set them up. I think the AC/DC unit was actually more like here, and I think my Dorn was probably more like this. But I wanted to make sure that there were always models over here such that the guys that were here would have to pile in and consolidate this way instead of coming over this way, so that they weren't touching the Dorn. And I was going to take the Dorn and just kind of like not shoot at the AC/DC, because I wasn't going to kill them. They were going to stay in combat no matter what. He doesn't have access to fall back and shoot. I'm not going to die. He's not going to die. I just want the Dorn to be able to shoot other things. However, over on the other side, it took a little while for me to like actually kill my way through all these AC/DC. It takes me a couple of turns to do so, but because of this, I never score this objective again. I scored it on turn 2. I never touch it again. I never score this. I never score this, and I actually only score 5 points of primary this entire game, because there's just this giant mob of guys who are hanging out on this point. And so the rest of the game kind of came down to, what can I do to try and make sure that Dan doesn't score a ton of primary on me? And it turns out the best way to do that is just to kill him off of it over and over again, try and make sure that he doesn't have any models left. But because he had so many guys, he ended up having a unit of like Traitor Guardsmen that were just hanging out over here basically the whole game. They hopped into a Rhino on turn 4, and they put themselves out into the middle of the board on turn 5. And this was one of those interesting games where I never really felt like I had an opportunity to push because I was going first. But I never really felt like there was an opportunity for me to get completely blown out because of how I did my screening. I think probably the one big thing, so going back to this unit of Krieg that was here, I think this heroic actually probably saves the game in a couple of ways, and I think this rapid ingress between these two moves, I think if I don't find this rapid ingress here, I think I just can potentially get blown out. I think it goes from a reasonably close game to me not having anything, because if this Dorn is also tagged at the end of the fight, I can't do anything. I'm now in a position where I cannot move at all the rest of the game. The only units that I can do anything with are this Exterminator, which can come out, and the unit of Death Ursula Creed that's hanging out on my home, and everything else is just tagged by AC/DC. I can never fall back because I won't be able to kill the AC/DC immediately afterwards. But overall, as we get towards the end of the game, one of the big things that does end up happening is I end up scoring way better on secondaries than Dan does, so it keeps the game relatively close. I end up scoring 47 points overall, and Dan ends up getting 58, which means that he wins the game by 11 points, which is enough to get his team a 12. And 15 of those points came primary at the very end of the game as well, because he was able to, like we mentioned, put a unit of Traitor Guardsmen just here on the point and make sure they had more OC than I did at the very end of the game. Overall, though, I had a lot of fun. Getting an 8 was a little bit less than my prediction. I was expecting to get like a 10 to 12, but because Dan had a really good turn where all of his advances were big and all of his charges went off, he was able to flip that a little bit. And so even though I still came back with an 8, realistically, it's probably about a -3 from what I was expecting to get from the game overall. Luckily, the rest of my team did very well. Andrew got a 19-1 against Space Wolves. Torin got an 18-2 against Thousand Suns. Griff got a 20-0 against Orcs. And Sam had a game that didn't go his way. He ended up getting a 5-15. But overall, with 3 big wins, a small loss, and a medium loss, we still came out ahead 70 points to 30 as a team. And with that done, it was time for us to start getting ready for the second round, which was going up against the Rough City Rosians. It was the Rose City Ruffians is normally the umbrella organization, but they split a bunch of their top players into two separate teams and then had those, play with a couple of the newer players, people who are trying to just have a good time. One of the things my captain told me before we started pairings was, sorry in advance. And the big reason for that is because he wanted to pair me up against Tyler Bertel. Yes, that Tyler Bertel from StatCheck, who does take all comers with a couple of the other Rose City Ruffian guys, including Lucas Troller and Nick OJ. But Tyler was playing Genestealer Cult's Host of Ascension. It had 1, 2, 3 Benefactus. One of them had the +1 to hit enhancement against characters. 1 Nexos, 1 Primus with the full... I think this is the lethal hits enhancement. 1, 2 Reductus Saboteurs. 1, 2, 3 units of Flamer Acolytes. Or 4 units? Oh, 1 with auto pistols, and then 1, 2, 3 with Flamers. 1, 2, 3, 4 units of Neophyte Hybrids, or 20-man Neophyte Hybrids. 1, 2, 3 Ridge Runners. 2 of them had the, I think it's Ignores Cover, and one of them has the +1 to hit. 1, 2, 3 units of Jackals, and then 1, 2 units of 5 Pure Strain Genestealers. Once again, though, we ended up playing this one on my table choice, which for round 2 was Games Workshop Layout 6. And the game that we got this time was Terraform Crucible of Battle. Now, in general, you usually want to go first on Terraform because you want to come out and you want to go Terraform, Terraform, and then your opponent has to give you units or shoot you off of those objectives relatively quickly. But a lot of armies get really gated because they can't do both. They usually don't have the action economy, they usually don't have the activations necessarily to both shoot you off of the objective and to counter terraform you. So if you can do that, you set yourself up to not only score a couple of extra points on these terraforms that your opponent doesn't have the tools to undo, but you're also in a position where you have taken a lot of board control and you don't have to spend more activations doing the counter terraform over and over and over again when you go first. But the other part of terraform is going first or second. Unless you're blowing your opponent out, you tend to score relatively high primary, whereas supply drop you tend to score low to medium primary unless you're winning really hard. Terraform, unless you're winning really hard, you're expecting both players to score a lot of primary points. In this game, going up against Tyler, he ended up going first. And because of that, he put a lot of things in my face that I couldn't really do a whole lot about no matter what. But he had a unit of bikes that were over here. They came out to about here. There was another unit of bikes that was around here. They went really far. And there was another unit of bikes over here. They came out to about here. Because they all, I think it's like Scout 9 and then move 12. But there was also a unit of Genestealers that started here that came in relatively close. Now, I made my first mistake on turn 1. I had my Taurox that started with Kasrkin in it somewhere in here, okay? And Tyler got relatively lucky between the mortals that he did and the fact that the Jackals, the bikes, have just a one shot with a las cannon, or a mining laser, I believe it's called. And between that, he actually killed this Taurox on the top of 1. And I got my Kasrkin out something like this, and he had his Genestealers, something like this, with the idea being that there was no room for me to send anything through this corridor. I thought to myself, I'm really smart. Tyler is going to charge me with these Genestealers. And then I'm going to set up my Meltamine in the middle of this unit here so that no matter where he touches my Kasrkin, I'll be able to throw a Meltamine at him. That was really dumb. What I really needed to do is I needed to set up the Meltamine here in the unit such that even if he didn't charge me, I could Meltamine him at the start of my command phase or at the start of the of my movement phase to see what kind of movement it opens up for myself. Both he and I realized, I think he realized that I made this mistake faster than I realized I made the mistake, but it was one of those things where I've been trying to make sure that I can get the Meltamine set up because I've had other people charge me in my games recently where they were able to touch me in such a way that I could not throw my Meltamine. And I was trying to make sure that that didn't happen. And I thought too hard about it, and I ended up overcorrecting and not being able to throw the Meltamine anyway. But a lot of what this game turned into was Tyler put units in front of me, and I could either try and kill them, or I could just do nothing. And in general, if you go first in the guard matchup and you're playing into Genestealer cults, they put so much in reserve that if you just push really hard into the board on turn 1, you can really limit where it is that they are allowed to be on the board really early in the game. However, because I was going second, I had to be very reactive. And so one of the big things that happened is with unit of bikes here, a unit of bikes, something like this, that had charged like over here, and another unit of bikes here, I just had to kill what was in front of me. And I ended up putting a Rogal Dorn, something like this, in the ruin. I ended up killing this unit of bikes, I killed this unit of bikes, I killed these Genestealers, I killed this unit of bikes. I put 20 Krieg, something spread out like this, over here, and then I set myself up and I was mentally ready to just get jumped on. And I actually got really lucky. So with my Dorn just kind of hanging out here, Tyler brought the Benefictus with the +1 to hit enhancement against characters. He brought it in somewhere over here in this shot. If you haven't played against the Neophyte Hybrid bricks in the past, these units hurt. They hurt basically everything in the game. You give them +1 AP and ignores cover from the Ridge Runners and the fact that they just come in. They have sustained on the turn that they come in. The Benefictus gives them +1 to hit, and I think like 2 or 3 las cannon shots on top of that. And then you pop another CP where you have crit 5s, and you have a character that gives them like lethal hits. So it's lethal, sustained on 5s. Oftentimes full re-rolling if you have a Primus in the unit. +1 AP, ignoring cover. And at that point, it doesn't really matter if you are shooting las guns. Because when you're shooting out like 30-something las gun shots that are re-rolling hits with lethal sustained 5s, AP1 ignoring cover, you're going to do like 4 or 5 damage to any target in the game off of your las guns alone. And then if your mining lasers and your seismic cannons and your Webbers all go off, suddenly you can just kill anything in the game as long as your dice are cooperating. However, it is fairly swingy because it is still hitting on 5s. Sometimes you just don't roll 5s and your 4s, while they hit, don't do an extra truckload of damage every single time. And so the unit that Tyler drops in over here ends up doing a lot of damage, but I think it ends up leaving my Dorn on like 8, which means I have to take a Battle Shock test, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to be bracketed. I'm still going to be hitting on 4s. I'll still have a Sentinel to give my own unit reroll 1s. And it means I'll be able to kill most of a brick of Neophytes. Most of the rest of the game comes down to Tyler has a couple of Neophyte bricks that are over here, and I never quite kill them, but I just kind of let them hang out because they're just a little bit too far, and if I ever shoot them without killing them, he can spend 1 CP, put them up in the sky, and then bring them anywhere else on the board, and I never really wanted to let him do that. We end up trading back and forth on the middle objective, we end up holding our home and one other for most of the game. But there's a couple mistakes that I made in this game that I want to talk to you guys about and make sure that you understand what tricks are available. So the first one, when I have this Rogal Dorn here, it ends up shooting back at this Benefictus unit. And I bring like a Scout Sentinel that was hanging out somewhere around here, over here to make sure that I get my reroll 1s. A Rogal Dorn rerolling 1s against a 20-man Neophyte unit has something in the neighborhood of like a 30 to 40% chance to just kill the unit. Obviously, you have to roll well on your number of shots from your oppressor cannon and your pulverizer cannon. But one of the things that I didn't really think about and I was not using particularly well was the Fields of Fire stratagem. Because a Rogal Dorn rerolling 1s shooting at a Neophyte brick has about a 30 to 40% chance to just kill a Neophyte brick outright if they're in the open. But if they go to ground, it goes down to like 20-ish%, and then but you can offset that pretty heavily with the Fields of Fire, which puts you back up to about the 30 to 40%, and then if they don't go to ground, they also are now at a spot where 60% of the time they can just lose the entire unit all at once. I didn't know that math beforehand, and because of that, I ended up shooting this Rogal Dorn, and this unit doesn't die. It has like all the special weapons, and so this unit ends up going back up into the sky. And I end up making this mistake like at least 1 or 2 more times throughout the course of the game where I just, for whatever reason, I wasn't using my Fields of Fire stratagem particularly well this game, and it meant that his Neophyte units kept going back into reserve where they were way safer than they were supposed to have been. The one other big mistake that I made this game was there was some kind of unit, I think this was Acolytes with pistols, I think. Maybe it was Flacco's Flamer Acolytes. But one of the first things on turn 1, I had put a Scout Sentinel here with the rest of my Krieg unit in order to try and terraform it, because I also needed to, I think he needed to recover or something. I just needed to be outside of my DZ. And the Scout Sentinel on my next turn, or some subsequent turn, comes out over here with the idea that it's going to charge out this way. And that Scout Sentinel, while it's there, is going to buy me a lot of space. It's going to have this big 9-inch you cannot deep strike into me. Of course, you can use a 6-inch deep strike stratagem. But it's also going to tie up that unit of Acolytes so that they can't go do other things. However, one of the other big tricks that GSC have that I had known about, and I've done it myself with Scions in the past, but didn't expect how much damage was actually going to come out, was Tyler put another unit of Neophytes, and it was spread out something like this, where he had like his special, like a couple of special weapons here, a couple of special weapons here, where they were hard to shoot for me, but they were all able to see the Scout Sentinel over here. And when I declared the charge, Tyler used the Overwatch with the Neophyte brick with the Primus, and with all of the reroll hits that it had, he just killed my Scout Sentinel. Losing the Scout Sentinel, I was kind of expecting that it was going to die on my opponent's next turn anyway. The fact that the Scout Sentinel was dead was not a surprise to me. However, I was expecting that Scout Sentinel was going to be able to do its charge or miss its charge, because it was still like a 7 or an 8. And the Scout Sentinel was going to either be here, or if it made the charge, be like here. And then it would have this big aura. I had like my Death Core of Krieg here. So there's just like this big aura where you cannot come in over here. But now, with the Scout Sentinel just dead, that aura of not being able to drop over here was suddenly open. And that meant that Tyler was able to put 2 units of Flamer Acolytes over here where they could go for 9-inch charges, or they could also just drop down and potentially flame away a lot of my Krieg. And because of that, the battle line was pushed way closer to me than I had wanted it to be at the time. Other than that, though, this game was really, really close for the most part. It was a lot of Tyler would put things in my face where I would have to deal with them. I was rather successful at killing most of the things that I shot at, minus the not using the fields of fire particularly correctly. And there was even one funny moment where I think I'd brought like a Leman Russ over here, and Tyler had his Ridge Runners hiding back over here. But I was able to shoot at the Ridge Runners, and I almost killed one, which probably wasn't the most impactful thing in the world, even if I had killed it. But he was saying, like, yeah, I mostly play on WTC boards. It was not a line of fire that he was used to existing, so he hadn't thought about it. So he almost lost a Ridge Runner for free. But after that, it ended up being a really hard-fought game, and we traded back and forth. I killed all the stuff he put in front of me. He brought it back. He placed it back in a spot that was annoying. But at the end of it, we ended up fighting for nearly 4 hours, and we ended up getting a 10-10. I got 86 points, Tyler got 91, and because he didn't beat me by 6 points or more, I ended up getting 10 team points out of it. And partly, that felt really good for me, because I know Tyler's a very good player. He's like, I don't know exactly what his role is, but he coaches and he helps do pairings for Team USA, and he's been going to WTC for a long time. So I know he's a very strong player. And we had a great game overall. And honestly, it helped me understand what GSC can do and what kind of damage to expect for a future game. So I'm glad I played it here at Ordo Fanaticus instead of playing it all of a sudden for the first time when we go out to Challengers Cup. But the rest of my team didn't do quite as well here. This was one of the teams that we were expecting to have a bit of a tough time into. I got a 10-10 out of Tyler. Andrew got a 10-10 in the Death Guard versus Chaos Knights, which was one of these games that I think we were expecting to go a little bit better. Griffin had a tough game going into Tyranids where he got a 7-13, where I heard a single Norn did like 15 damage in the 2 Melta shots to one of the big knights. Torn got a 7 with his Tyranids against Justin's Ultramarines, and Sam, we didn't realize this at the time, but apparently had a much worse board for his game going into Alex and the Thousand Sons, so he ended up coming back with a 1. But even if Sam comes back with a 10 here and we go plus 9 points, we are still down 44, and I think we needed 45 to get a draw. So we ended up losing by a decent amount, but overall, I still felt very good about my performance. For a third round, we ended up playing up against Underwhelming Force, Baby Seals, Shelter in Numbers, or something like that. Before the game even started, one of the guys on their team, Tom, came up to me and was like, yo, I'm a big fan of your channel. I've been watching it on and off. If we have a chance, you should definitely pair into me in this game. And I was like, yeah, sure, it sounds like a good time. Now, I'm going to be honest, Tom. I was looking forward to the idea of playing you, but I just told my captain, like, do whatever you think we need to do in order to win the round. And it turns out it also happened to be me taking you out of the rotation. Now this goes back to part of the idea for my team captain being that he was going to take me, put me on my board choice, and make me play the strongest player on their team. And Tom was the highest rated player on their team by a decent margin. Also, really cool guy. But he was playing Chaos Demon Shadow Legion. He had Be'lakor, a Bloodthirster with the Fade to Darkness, so if it kills something and goes back into reserve, if it's no longer engaged. 2 units of Nurglings, 2 units of Pink Horrors, 2 units of Fleshhounds, 1 unit of Accursed Cultist with the Dark Commune with the Scout 9 enhancement, I think it is. 1 Cultist Mob, 1 Chaos Lord, 2 units of Havocs, all with las cannons, and then 1 5-man unit of Legionaries. And the big keys of what this does is 1, the Bloodthirster, it goes in, it tries to kill something ideally fairly big all on its own, and then after it kills that target, it is then going to go back up into space if it killed it and is now no longer in engagement. The Pink Horrors and the Nurglings are surprisingly difficult to kill because the Nurglings are -1 to wound in this detachment, and the Pink Horrors are -1 to hit in this detachment. And the Accursed Cultist with the Dark Commune can go really far, really fast. I think it's Scout 9, it might be Scout 6, but regardless, they scout up, and then they can pop Advance and Charge. So I believe if they Scout 9, it's 9, 15, plus 18, so up to 33 inches of threat range on the top of 1 if you want to take it. And then the other thing is the Chaos Lord. There is a stratagem in the detachment where you pick up 1 Space Marine unit, or 1 Chaos Space Marine unit and 1 Demon unit, and the Chaos Lord lets you do that for free as long as you pick his unit up. Tom and I played this one on Hammer and Anvil Hidden Supplies, and one of the things that happened is, of course, this does not exist, but instead they split this direction. So there's a spot where you could hide behind them a little bit like right here, but for the most part you were standing fairly in the open on this objective if you wanted to. Now, one other key about playing up against the Shadow Legion is, of course, knowing that Be'lakor has the 18-inch Lone Up aura that he can give to himself and every other unit in the army as long as they're at least partially within 6 of Be'lakor. And because of this, a lot of the firing angles that you're looking at with like your Dorns and your long-range fire just cannot shoot a lot of the things that Tom had unless they get relatively close. So he generally has a lot of control over what engagements happen in relation to the Dorns, but he doesn't have as much control of the engagements that happen with the Kasrkin because they're going to be in transports, they're going to be pretty fast. Now, Tom was a gem mode opponent, but I'm not going to lie, I thought this game was a little boring. One of the things that happened is because we're playing in this teams environment, we're not necessarily playing to go for singles wins. We're not necessarily trying to go for opportunities to make big things happen. And one of the things that happened fairly often is I would talk to my coach or my captain, and I'd say, hey, I see an opportunity. I might be able to push relatively aggressively here. Do you want me to take the risk and try and get a bigger score, or do you want me to not take the risk and just take a stable score? And every single time I did that, every single time, my captain or coach would tell me, just don't lose. Whatever you do, just don't take on enough risk that you're going to potentially jeopardize the rest of the round. And so every single time I saw an opportunity to do something kind of exciting, like, oh, maybe this will be a fun play, maybe I can go do something really big here, I was told, don't do it. So I ended up playing a game that was incredibly stable up against Tom. I had my unit of Death Corps of Krieg standing over here pretty much the entire game, and Tom had his unit of ACDC, the Cursed Cultist, standing over here, and they both stood there the entire game until turn 5. Neither of us wanted to push. We both wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to stand on our objectives and at least get our 5 points of primary every single turn, because of course, in Hidden Supplies, your home objectives don't matter for you. They can only matter for your opponent, and then they matter for Hold More. But I think there were 2 things that happened relatively early on in the game that end up changing a couple of the ways that the game could have gone. The first one is Tom started off the game relatively early, and he put Pink Horrors like here, and then they end up coming out to deal with the unit of Kasrkin. So there's only a couple of things in this game that I thought really changed the dynamics of how it potentially could have gone. The first one was on turn 1, Tom put his unit of Accursed Cultists, something like this, and he put, I think it was some number of Pink Horrors on this objective. And then my response on my turn 1 was I put a Chimera like here and a unit of Kasrkin like here in order to make sure that Tom was not going to hold this during his next command phase. So the pink horrors end up coming out and killing some number of the Kasrkin, not as many as he wanted, but some number of them. I had a Rogal Dorn here. It shot the pink horrors, and because they're -1 to hit, he lived with 1 pink horror. This unit of horrors lived until the end of the game because the pink horrors end up charging into the Rogal Dorn, and every single time I would leave like 1 model alive. I would shoot all my stubbers at it. I had 18 stubber shots. I'd shoot the meltas into it. I'd shoot the autocannon into it, and he'd live with 1 model every single time. And so he just continued regenerating guys whenever it would pass a battle shock. He would spend some CP because he was just swimming in command points this entire game in order to make sure there was always a couple more pink horrors or blue horrors in the list, and they would split just enough so that it was always there. So that was pretty funny. The other big key that kind of comes into this matchup is the Bloodthirster. And the Bloodthirster, there's a couple of different ways that you can deal with it. The first one is you can heroically intervene into it because it needs to not only kill something in the fight phase, it also needs to not be engaged at the end of the fight phase. And so if you have like both a Taurox and a unit of 10 Kasrkin that are all in the fight with the Bloodthirster, it simply does not have enough attacks to consistently kill both the Taurox and all the guys. If you get like 20 Death Korps of Krieg into it, he just does not have enough attacks to kill that many Death Korps of Krieg. The other thing that you can do is when you have a Rogal Dorn shooting at a Bloodthirster, as long as it gets to shoot its Meltas for the Overwatch, you're going to be doing somewhere between 4 and 10 damage to a Bloodthirster every time you Overwatch most of the time. So, with the Bloodthirster, I believe it has about 20 HP. That means it's going to take you somewhere between 2 and 3 Overwatches on average in order to just kill the Bloodthirster. So the Bloodthirster is almost never going to get more than 3 charges off in a game. So with that in mind, the other big thing that ended up happening in this game was So with that in mind, the other major thing that happens is an opportunity for Tom. So the other big thing that happens in this game is Tom making a bit of a blunder. He has his Bloodthirster here that had already been Overwatch once, and I think it was on 12 at this point, and he ends up drawing Cole the Horde. And the only Cole target that he has access to at all, I mean, there's the one that's spread out back here with Ursula Creed and friends, is the unit of 20 Death Korps of Krieg right over here. And the Bloodthirster ends up coming out over here. He has a unit of Fleshhounds that started something like this, and they all charge into the Death Korps of Krieg. I have a Dorn back over here that overwatches the Bloodthirster a second time, so it goes from 12, and I think it goes down to 6. So we've been well on track for doing a normal amount of damage to the Bloodthirster in a couple of overwatches. But the Bloodthirster, as it comes over here and swings into the Krieg, and these Fleshhounds come and they swing into the Krieg, he doesn't get anywhere close to killing them. Bloodthirster without rerolls, it's got, I think it's 14 attacks, and it ends up killing, I think it kills like 8 Death Korps of Krieg by itself, and then maybe a couple more come out of the Fleshhounds as well, but he never gets close to killing the full 20. And because the Bloodthirster didn't actually kill an entire unit, when I pull myself out of coherency and don't let him consolidate into the rest of the unit, I am now also in a position where the Bloodthirster can't leave, which means that the Dorn just gets to shoot at it a second time, and this time when it's not hitting on 6s, it's going to be doing a lot more than 4 to 8 damage on an Overwatch. It's just going to potentially kill the Bloodthirster outright. So I do end up getting this Bloodthirster basically for free, where Tom gets baited by the Cole the Horde draw that he ends up getting. But as we get towards the end of the game, Tom finally takes the ACDC unit that was here, and it charges something. I don't remember exactly what it charged. I think it charges a Rogal Dorn that I have like here, and he ends up taking this ACDC unit, and it spreads out really far between the objectives, and he also has Bellicor, something like here, that's also touching the objective like this. Okay. As we get to my final turn, I only need to do one thing. I end up drawing Storm Hostile Objective, and I need to stand on this objective, and this objective, in order to try and hold more, and also in order to try and hold 2 out in the open, and ideally also hold more. And the entire game came down to charging basing requirements. because I had one Rogal Dorn over here that was in combat with the Pink Hordes basically the entire game. Between the Rogal Dorn that was like here and this Rogal Dorn, we kill Be'lakor. And the ACDs are spread out really far in this unit, right? But as I bring my Death Korps of Krieg out this way, I make a couple of small like movement errors. And the movement errors are, instead of going directly towards... the movement errors are, I went too close to the objective with too many models. What I'm supposed to do at the very end here is this unit that is like this, is I take a couple of models and they go directly towards the objective, make the charge as short as possible so it's as difficult to fail as I can. But the rest of the models should be coming out this way, using the coherency in order to make sure that if I roll high on a charge, that I don't have to go towards the ACDC, because there's the Rogal Dorn, something like this, and the ACDC unit was spread out something like this, right? Because what I want to do is I want to take these models here, and I just want to have them just base whatever the ACDC are in this area. And if I roll high, these models might need to come over this way to base other ACDC and thereby pull more of my opponent's models into the combat. But because I went too close like this, they ended up having to go this way, and I rolled high on my charge, where if they had gone out this way instead, they would not have been close enough. They would not have had to base, and then they could have come out this way a little bit more and not pull as many of Tom's models into the combat. And what ended up happening is that Tom had enough models actually swinging into my Krieg that he killed enough of them that I didn't have enough OC left on the objective at the very end of the game. And it ended up being a 60-60 perfect singles draw, which was a 10-10 for both sides. Now, I want to say right now, Tom was a fantastic opponent. I would love to play him again sometime. But I also think the game would have looked very different if we played this in a singles environment instead of in a teams environment. And I'm really looking forward to what that actually looks like if we end up playing it against each other another time. Now, part of why I was told just don't take any risks is because the rest of my team was doing fairly well. Sam, again, got a small loss into Imperial Knights. I got a 10 versus Tom's Chaos Demons. My Captain Griff got a 20 out of our opponent's Death Guard. Our Death Guard got a 17 out of our opponent's Dark Angels. And Tauron on Tyranids got a 7 versus their Necron's 13. I just needed to be very, very stable because we knew that this game was going to be a fairly big win, and we knew that this game was going to be a fairly big win. And I don't think I heard how these games were going just quite yet, but as long as I wasn't getting a loss, a close game and 2 big wins is usually enough to put you at least in draw territory. And so as long as Sam and Tauron also don't get blown out, we should be looking at a win, which is exactly what happened. So for the last game of the event, once again, as we're going through pairings, my captain comes up and tells me, I'm sorry. And what I thought this meant was that they had a player on their team who was playing Space Wolves Stormlance. You know, very similar to classic Wolf Jail list, just with a lot less stuff than it used to have. And I told my captain before we had done pairings, look, I am either going to come out of this game with a 5 if I go second, or a 15 if I go first, because of it's just the way that the matchup goes, especially on Search and Destroy, where we are so close to each other that my opponent is going to make those turn 1 chargers if he wants them. So I either have to stand really far back and give him a ton of ground early on in the game, or I can try and contest him early on the hopes that I go first, where I can really push him very far. That's what I thought my captain was apologizing to me for. Instead, he was apologizing because he gave me the mirror. Little did he know that I have won 20 games in the mirror this edition and lost 1. But with that in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at the list that my opponent was playing. I was playing up against Daniel and his Mechanized Assault Guard. He had 1 Cadian Castellan, 1 Rogal Dorn Commander, Slay Marbo, Ursula Creed, 2 units of Catachan Jungle Fighters, 2 Chimeras, both with Heavy Flamers, 3 Tauroxes, 2 Artillery Teams with Siege Cannons, 1 Cadian Heavy Weapon Squad with Mortars, 3 units of Kasrkin, 2 of them with Melta Plasma, 1 of them with Hotshot Volley Guns instead of Meltas, 1 Krieg Heavy Weapon Squad with Flamers, 1 Rogal Dorn Battle Cannon, 1 Rogal Dorn Battle Tank, and then 2 individual Scout Sentinels. There's actually a lot of overlap between the 2 lists that we were bringing, despite the fact that we were playing different detachments. So a couple of keys to understanding this matchup. 1, the combined arms player is just going to win the tank shootout. There's not really a lot that can be done to overcome the fact that one of these armies has lethal hits and the other one does not. It just means that the player who has lethal hits does way more damage with their meltas and their pulverizer cannons than the player who does not have the lethal hits. Also, I had an entire extra Rogal Dorn. I was going to win the shootout if Daniel ever chose to just engage in that. However, the other big difference is that I was a little bit activation gated. Every time I wanted to interact with Daniel's midboard presence, I first had to kill a transport in order to get his guys out. And while yes, my Kasrkin are fairly consistent at actually killing a transport, they're not very consistent. They're not going to be able to both kill the transport and then kill what's inside, and as long as Daniel is staging all of his transports in reasonable places, I'm not going to be able to shoot at the transports with my tanks first. So it's going to be hard for me to kill both the transport and the guys inside. Daniel and I played this once again on my board choice, which was Games Workshop Layout 6. And we played this one on Search and Destroy, Take and Hold. We were already joking at the beginning of it that we felt it was fairly hard to prove an advantage in the guard mirror, and whoever went second was probably going to have, 11, 12, maybe a 13. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, probably the most interesting that happens in this game happens on turn 1. So Daniel ends up getting the first turn, and he has a Taurox here, which has Cadian inside. And this Taurox comes out over here and touches this objective. I think it's because it was for tempting target. And so what I end up doing on my turn 1 is I take a Rogal Dorn and I stick it here such that it is able to see. But one of the stratagems that the Mechanized Assault has is reactive move flat 6 with the transports. And so this Taurox ends up moving right to about here. On my first turn, I started a Chimera here, and I scouted up 6 inches to here or whatever, and I gave it move, move, move on turn 1, and I moved it here, and after the reactive move, I was still able to draw a line of sight from my Chimera into this Taurox. So I have my Chimera here, there's a Taurox here with Cadian inside, okay? Now, not a whole lot else happens on turn 1. I kill a unit of Cadian that had missed a charge, I killed a unit of Cadian that missed a charge here originally. I killed another Taurox that was here, that was establishing a locus. So I kill this, kill this. I go ahead and take this Chimera. It's the only thing that can shoot at this Taurox at all. And the first thing I do, I shoot Hunter Killer. I get a lethal hit. It converts into 6 damage. I also have the 2 Melta guns coming out from the Kasrkin that are inside. They come out, they both hit. He fails both saves. They do 11 damage. So suddenly, my Chimera just did 17 damage to this Taurox and just kill it immediately. And at that point, we both kind of looked at each other and we both kind of chuckled. And we were both thinking, we were speaking very openly about it, saying, I think that turns this game from being probably an 11 or 12 for me, simply because I'm going second, to 13 or 14 for me, because I'm going second, and now the attack that I had going towards my natural objective, like this objective here, just collapsed. Like, he does not have the assets necessary to do anything about this objective going forward. I'm not going to lie to you guys. The rest of this game, I ended up playing very passively, and there's a couple of reasons for this. One, Daniel knew he never could engage in the shootout at all, right? He ended up starting like a Dorn here and like a Dorn here. They ended up hanging out over here for most of the game, simply because he was just trying to, he recognized that he did not have the assets necessary to attack my natural anymore. He just wanted to put all of his firepower in one place so that it could support each other and protect his own natural. And I asked my captain, and my coach had gone home at this point because he had a very long separate drive than the rest of us. But I asked them several times, like, hey, I have an opportunity to push here. I have an opportunity to try and make something happen and go for a bigger win. And they asked me, like, what kind of score are you looking at, like, right now? And I told them, hey, it's probably like a 12 to 14, something like that. And they asked me, like, okay, how likely is it that you're going to do better? It's like, well, if the gamble goes well, I'm going to get a 20. But if it goes poorly, like, I'm probably still looking at, like, a 9. They just said, no, don't do it. Just take the 13 or take like the 12 to 14 very safely. And so I just never took any risk for the rest of the game. The one risk that I did take was I had a Rogal Dorn battle tank that was something like this at the time. And I set it up such that it was something like this. And this was on like turn 4, I want to say. and I was just trying to force Daniel to try and give me some assets, but I didn't need to. I was just, to be entirely honest with you guys, I was a little bored because I just didn't take any risks. Daniel wasn't taking any risks. He wanted to lock in like his, 6 to 8. I was very happy locking in like a 12 to a 14. So we just both sat there, scored our primary, scored our secondary, looked at each other. I took one risk. It didn't go well. I walked away with a 13. I ended up getting my 15 points at the end. I scored all of my primary otherwise, and Daniel scored most of his primary, and then, walked away with a 7. The game was fun. I had a really good time, like actually just like rolling dice and like talking about the game with Daniel because he's a good player. Normally plays. He's been playing a lot of Emperor's Children recently, but he was also playing World Eaters, and apparently it's fairly common for people to use guard as they'll jump from like your World Eaters or your Blood Angels or your Emperor's Children, and then they go and play guard as a way to play something different as their shooting army, which I totally understand. I would look at playing Blood Angels if I ever made myself play Marines. But this game really was decided based on the fact that my Chimera just killed his Taurox, and that was about it. There was some funny stuff that also happened. I had like a Leman Russ just like shoot at the artillery down here a couple of times. There was some hot Kasrkin on Kasrkin action that I brought some in like over here. I had a unit that was like here, and then his Kasrkin came over. He rapid ingressed a Taurox here with Kasrkin inside, and so it meant that this Leman Russ just killed it, and then there was just like Kasrkin hanging out as DZ. Yeah, it's definitely one of those spots that I think Daniel also would have had to play it differently if he was playing this in a singles environment, because once the Taurox dies and his attack collapses, he is then, if he's trying to win this in a singles environment, he is then forced to just go ham. He just has to like send his entire army at me and hope I can't kill enough of it. And remember how we were saying like the mechanized player opting into the shootout is usually bad for the mechanized player? He would have had to just like accept that he's either going to win like a narrow victory by throwing his entire army at me, or he's going to collapse and get absolutely 20'd. And neither of us wanted to take a big risk on the game, so we just end up taking the 13-7. I probably could have taken the risk a little bit more. So looking at the rest of our team, Andrew got a 10-10 into Imperial Knights, Griff got a 16-4 out of Sisters, Torrent got a 3 versus the Space Wolves 17. I came back with my 13, and Sam got an 18-2 into the Chaos Demons. And so we ended up winning 60-40, which I think gives us like a 4-point buffer. And I think it's pretty unlikely that I ever come back with worse than a 9. So I probably could have pushed this for even more points. But that's one of those things that kind of happens. I wasn't super in tune with how the other games were going. I was relying on what my captain and my coach were telling me, just saying, don't push the entire time. But not pushing ends up coming back. We end up winning this one 60-40. And overall, we were quite happy with how we ended up doing, because we were expecting, or we had our goal of going 2-2 at this event. We ended up going 3-1, and if we had gotten one more game win throughout the rest of the whole thing, we potentially could have gotten third, because we just needed to win one more game here, where we would then tie on this tiebreaker, and then we would have had more battle points than Heroic Knights 2. Anyway, some takeaways. This was probably not the most exciting after-action report that I've ever done, and it's largely because my captain did a couple of things. One, he used me to just tank all the Horde matchups that nobody else on the team wanted to play, and two, he wanted to use me to take all of the best players from the opposing teams, make sure that they were not getting big wins. And I did both of those things fantastically. My lowest score was an 8, I got 2 10s, and then I got a 13. I potentially could have pushed some of those for more points, but every time I had an opportunity to do so, the captain said, no, just calm down. Just go ahead, get your very stable game. I never took any risks. I never really had to make anything happen in any of these games, and it ended up working out just fine. For now, though, thank you so much for coming out to the Ordo Fanaticus OFCC Teams 2025. I have another big teams event, like I mentioned, coming up in a couple of weeks, the Challengers Cup, which will be happening in Utah. If you're going to be there, make sure you come say hi. I'll be playing with Githammer. I'll probably be wearing like a big flashy Hawaiian shirt with the rest of my squad. And I promise we got more content coming up relatively soon, because the singles environment is a lot healthier until the Imperial Knights Codex comes out, so it'll be a good time. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys all next time. Bye-bye.